The man had been in the camp for 11 hours when Bill Anderson finally asked him the question. 40 guerrilla fighters sat around scattered campfires in the Missouri woods. The summer night was thick with heat and the smell of horses. Crickets sang in the darkness beyond the firelight. Stars burned overhead like cold witnesses. The stranger stood in the center of the camp. He had been laughing at someone's joke just moments before. Now his face was frozen. Bill Anderson sat on a fallen log, his Colt Navy revolver resting casually on his thigh. The firelight caught the human scalps braided into his horse's saddle nearby. 47 of them, each one a different shade of brown or blonde or gray. His eyes were fixed on the newcomer. What is the river password? The words hung in the air like smoke. Around the campfires, conversations died. 40 men stopped moving. Jesse James, 17 years old and sitting cross-legged by the nearest fire, slowly set down his coffee tin. His hand drifted toward his belt. The stranger's mouth opened. Nothing came out. 1 second of silence, 2 seconds, 3. Bill Anderson's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I thought so. But wait. Before we see what happened next, before we witness what Bill Anderson did to the man who had fooled his entire camp for 11 hours, we need to go back 11 hours, back to how this all began. The Missouri summer of 1864 was a season of blood. Union forces controlled the cities, Confederate sympathizers controlled the shadows, and in between them, moving like ghosts through the forests and farmlands, rode the guerrillas. They called themselves bushwhackers. The Union called them terrorists. History would call them something else entirely. By the summer of 1864, the most feared of all these guerrilla bands was led by a 24-year-old man with dead eyes and a saddle decorated with human scalps. His name was William T. Anderson. But no one called him William anymore. They called him Bloody Bill. And the Union Army wanted him dead more than they wanted to win the war itself. But killing Bill Anderson was not simple. He moved constantly. He struck without warning. He vanished like morning mist before Union cavalry could respond. His men were loyal beyond reason. They would die for him without hesitation. So the Union tried something different. They sent spies, men who could blend in with Confederate sympathizers, men who could find Anderson's camps and report his movements, men who could identify his lieutenants, map his escape routes, count his weapons. Most of these spies were never heard from again. Their bodies would turn up weeks later, if at all, usually missing pieces, usually arranged in ways that sent messages to anyone else who might try the same thing. But the Union kept sending them, because Bloody Bill Anderson had become a problem that could not be ignored. And on that morning in late summer 1864, a man rode into the small town of Arrow Rock, Missouri, with a very specific mission. The stranger called himself Samuel Thornton. He was approximately 30 years old, with the kind of weathered face that could belong to any farmer or drifter in Missouri. His clothes were Confederate gray, faded and road-worn. His horse was unremarkable. His accent was perfect, the flat Missouri twang that marked him as local. He told everyone who asked that he was looking to join the fight, said the Union had burned his farm outside of Lexington, said they had, and here his voice would catch just slightly. They had done things to his wife before they killed her, said he wanted revenge. It was a good story, a believable story, the kind of story that would get you pointed toward Quantrill's men or toward Anderson's guerrillas if you knew who to ask. The stranger knew who to ask. By noon, he had a name, a location, a time. By sunset, he was riding toward a forest clearing 12 miles from the river, where 40 of the most dangerous men in Missouri were waiting for the next raid. He was riding toward Bloody Bill Anderson's camp, and he was carrying, hidden in the hollow heel of his left boot, a detailed map of every Union patrol route within 50 miles. If he could get that information back to the Union commanders, if he could tell them where Anderson was camped and where he planned to strike next, the war in Missouri might shift overnight. Thousands of lives might be saved. He just had to survive the night. He just had to pretend to be something he wasn't, surrounded by 40 killers who had learned to smell lies the way wolves smell blood. The stranger kept touching his left boot as he rode. We will find out why that mattered later. The sun was setting when the stranger reached the edge of the forest. 2 riders emerged from the tree line before he could call out. They materialized like shadows given form, their horses silent on the soft forest floor. Both had pistols drawn. One of them was barely more than a boy, 17, maybe 18. Thin face, cold eyes that seemed too old for his years. He studied the stranger the way a hawk studies a mouse in an open field. That boy was Jesse James. He would remember this face for the rest of his life. The other rider was older, bearded, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. He was the one who spoke. "State your business or state your prayers. Your choice." The stranger raised his hands slowly. "Name's Samuel Thornton. I was told you boys might have room for one more. Lost everything to the Bluebellies, looking to make them pay for it." The older man's eyes narrowed. "Who told you where to find us?" The stranger named the man from Arrow Rock, a known Confederate sympathizer, a name that could be verified. The bearded guerrilla glanced at Jesse James. The boy said nothing, just kept staring at the stranger with those ancient eyes. "Wait here." The bearded man wheeled his horse and disappeared into the trees. The stranger was left alone with Jesse James. Neither of them spoke. The crickets began their evening chorus. Somewhere in the forest, a horse whinnied. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke and approaching darkness. Jesse James did not blink. The stranger felt sweat trickling down his spine despite the cooling air. "You got kin in Missouri?" The question came suddenly, unexpectedly. The stranger nodded. "Had kin. Union killed them." Jesse tilted his head slightly. "Where?" "Lexington. Had a farm outside town." The boy was silent for a long moment. Then, "I know Lexington. Rode through there in the spring." The stranger's heart stopped. Did this boy know Lexington well? Had he been lying about his past? Was his cover already blown here at the very edge of the camp? He forced his voice to remain steady. "Good town. Before the Bluebellies burned it." Jesse James studied him for another eternal moment. Then he looked away. They burned a lot of towns. The stranger breathed again. But he noticed something. The boy had not said it was a good town, had not agreed or disagreed about the burning, had simply watched, filed that away, remembered. The stranger would not learn until much later that Jesse James never forgot a face, never forgot a voice, never forgot when someone's story did not quite fit. The bearded guerrilla returned. "Follow me. Bill wants to see you himself." The stranger nodded. This was good. This was the plan. Get into the camp. Meet Anderson. Prove himself trustworthy. Learn what he could. Slip away in the chaos of the next raid. Simple. He kicked his horse forward and rode directly into the den of bloody Bill Anderson. The camp was larger than the stranger expected. 40 men, maybe more, scattered in small groups around a dozen campfires spread through a forest clearing. Horses tied to trees and makeshift rope lines. Stacks of rifles and ammunition covered with canvas tarps. The smell of coffee and roasting meat and unwashed bodies. And in the center of it all, seated on a fallen log like a king on his throne, Bill Anderson. The stranger had heard the stories. Everyone in Missouri had heard the stories, the scalps, the massacres, the eyes that had stopped being human somewhere along the way. But the stories had not prepared him for the reality. Bill Anderson was not a large man, 5'10", maybe 160 pounds. His face was almost handsome in a gaunt, starving way. His dark hair hung to his shoulders, unwashed and wild. But his eyes were the coldest things the stranger had ever seen. They were blue, pale blue like a winter sky. And they looked at the stranger the way a butcher looks at a side of beef. No emotion, no recognition of humanity, just assessment, calculation. How much meat is there? How much blood will spill when cut? The stranger dismounted. Bill Anderson did not stand. "You claim the Union wronged you." His voice was soft, almost gentle. The kind of voice that made you lean in to hear it. The kind of voice that made you forget just for a moment about the 47 scalps hanging from his saddle. The stranger nodded. "They killed my wife, burned my farm, took everything I had." Bill Anderson's eyes did not change. A lot of men say that. A lot of men lie. The stranger met his gaze, forced himself not to look away, not to blink, not to show the terror that was clawing at his chest. "I am not lying." Silence. One of the campfires crackled. A horse stamped its hoof. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Bill Anderson smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who had forgotten what smiles were supposed to mean. But it was technically a smile. "Everyone lies to me eventually, the honest ones last longer." He gestured toward the campfires. "Find yourself a spot. We ride tomorrow night. You will prove yourself then. Or you will not." The stranger nodded. "Thank you." Bill Anderson had already looked away, dismissed him, moved on to whatever darkness occupied his thoughts. The stranger walked toward the nearest campfire on legs that felt like water. He had done it. He was inside. Now he just had to survive the night. The first hour was the hardest. The stranger found a spot near a small campfire at the edge of the camp. 3 guerrillas sat there already. Weathered men in their 30s, cleaning weapons and speaking in low voices. They looked up when he approached, sized him up, made room for him without being asked. This was how it worked in the guerrilla bands. You were either trusted or you were dead. There was no middle ground, and Bill Anderson had given the signal that this newcomer was for now acceptable. The stranger sat down, one of the men. Graying beard, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, handed him a tin cup of coffee, fresh today. Took it off a Union patrol 3 days ago. The stranger took it, drank, said nothing. That was the key. Say as little as possible. Let others talk. Listen. Observe. File away every detail that might be useful. The 3 guerrillas returned to their conversation. They were talking about Centralia. The stranger's ears perked up, though his face remained impassive. He had heard whispers about something big being planned, something that would strike at the heart of Union supply lines, but the details had been impossible to find. Now, sitting at this campfire, he was hearing them. Train comes through every other day, always got soldiers on it, sometimes 10, sometimes 50, depends on what they are moving. The gray-bearded man spat into the fire. Bill wants to send a message, a real message this time. Something the bluebellies cannot ignore. The 3rd guerrilla. Younger, maybe 25, with nervous hands that never stopped moving, leaned forward. He wants to stop a train. In broad daylight. That is insane. They will have cavalry on us before we can ride 5 miles. The graybeard shook his head. Bill does not care about cavalry. Bill does not care about anything anymore. Not since they killed his sister. A heavy silence fell over the campfire. The stranger filed that away. The sister. He had heard fragments of this story. Something about a building collapsing. Something about the Union being responsible. But the details had always been murky. Now he was getting closer to the truth. But wait. Before we learn what happened to Bill Anderson's sister, before we understand why a train full of Union soldiers was about to meet the most brutal fate in Missouri history, we need to understand something else first. The password. Because in the guerrilla camps of Missouri, trust was not given. It was proven. And the way you proved it, the way you showed that you were truly one of Quantrill's men, truly a Confederate guerrilla and not a Union spy, was through a series of passwords, codes, call signs, secret phrases that changed every few weeks and were known only to the inner circle. The stranger had been warned about this. His Union handlers had told him, "We do not know the passwords. No one who has gotten close enough to learn them has survived to report back. You will have to improvise. Avoid any situation where you might be tested." The stranger had nodded. He was good at improvising. He had been a spy for 2 years, had infiltrated Confederate camps in Arkansas and Tennessee, had survived situations that should have killed him. He could handle this. He did not know that the password he would face was different from all the others. He did not know that Bill Anderson had created a special test, a question so specific, so connected to the guerrillas' secret routes and safe houses, that only someone who had been with them for months would know the answer. He did not know that he was already in that first hour marked for death. He just did not know it yet. The second hour brought food. Someone had killed a deer earlier that day. The meat was roasting over a central fire, and the smell filled the camp with something almost normal, almost peaceful. like a church picnic or a family gathering, if you ignored the weapons and the scalps and the dead eyes of the men around you. The stranger ate. He listened. He learned. The guerrillas talked freely around their fires. They had no reason to hide their plans from a fellow Confederate sympathizer. No reason to suspect that the quiet man with the Lexington accent was memorizing every word. The stranger learned about the train schedule. He learned about the escape routes. Through the forest across the river to safe houses run by Confederate sympathizers. He learned about the weapons cache hidden 3 miles north. He learned about the next target, a Union supply depot outside of Sturgeon. Every piece of information was another nail in bloody Bill Anderson's coffin. Every detail was another advantage for the Union forces hunting these men. The stranger kept touching his left boot. The map hidden there was becoming more valuable by the minute, if he could get back to Union lines. If he could deliver this intelligence to his commanders. The entire guerrilla network might collapse within weeks. Thousands of lives saved. The end of the terror. He just had to survive until morning. The third hour brought Jesse James. The boy appeared at the stranger's campfire without warning. One moment the spot across the fire was empty. The next moment Jesse was sitting there, cleaning a Colt revolver with methodical precision. He did not greet the stranger, did not acknowledge him at all, just sat there, cleaning his gun, watching. The gray-bearded guerrilla. The stranger had learned his name was Old Tom, glanced at Jesse and then away. There was something like respect in his eyes. Maybe something like fear. The stranger had heard about Jesse James. Everyone in Missouri had heard about Jesse James. 17 years old and already credited with more than a dozen kills. Quantrill had called him the coldest young killer he had ever seen. Bill Anderson treated him like a favored son, and now he was sitting 3 feet away, his ancient eyes fixed on the stranger's face. The stranger forced himself to remain calm. This was just a test. The boy was probably curious about the newcomer, nothing more. But there was something in Jesse's gaze that made the stranger's skin crawl, something that said, "I see you. I see what you really are. I just have not figured out how to prove it yet." The fire crackled. Old Tom resumed his story about a Union patrol they had ambushed the previous month. Jesse James kept cleaning his gun. The stranger kept smiling, and the night crept slowly toward dawn. The fourth hour brought the first close call. Old Tom was describing a skirmish near Rocheport when he mentioned a Union commander named Colonel Harding. "We caught 5 of his boys trying to ford the river. Bill let 4 of them live. Sent them back with a message carved into the 5th one's chest." The stranger nodded along, making the appropriate sounds of approval. But his mind was racing. He knew Colonel Harding, had met him twice at Union headquarters in Jefferson City, had received orders from him personally. If Old Tom mentioned any detail that connected Harding to intelligence operations, if he said anything that might reveal the stranger's true allegiance, "Harding is a fool," Old Tom spat. "Keeps sending his boys into the same traps, does not learn. Bill says he is like a dog chasing the same squirrel into the same tree every day." The stranger allowed himself a small laugh. Sounds about right. He would never know how close he came in that moment. Old Tom had been about to mention the prisoners they had taken from Harding's unit, how they had questioned them before killing them, how one of them had mentioned a spy being sent into the guerrilla camps. But the gray-bearded man got distracted by the arrival of fresh coffee, and the moment passed. The stranger breathed. But Jesse James was still watching, still filing away every reaction, every word, every tiny flicker of emotion that crossed the stranger's face. The boy missed nothing, and somewhere in that ancient young mind, pieces were beginning to connect. The 5th hour brought the first real test. A guerrilla the stranger had not seen before approached the campfire. Tall, red-haired, a scar across his throat that suggested someone had once tried to slit it and failed. He looked at the stranger. "You." The stranger tensed. "New boy. Come help with the horses." The stranger relaxed slightly. This was normal. New recruits were given menial tasks. It was how you proved yourself, how you showed you were willing to work before you were allowed to fight. He stood. "Lead the way." The red-haired man led him to the rope line where 24 horses were tethered. The animals shifted restlessly in the darkness, Sensing the tension in the camp that never quite faded, Bill wants the horses ready to move by dawn. Check the hooves. Make sure the saddles are tight. The stranger nodded. He moved down the line, checking each horse with the practiced ease of a man who had grown up on a farm. This, at least, was not acting. He genuinely knew horses, knew how to check for stones in hooves, for loose saddle straps, for signs of lameness. He was halfway down the line when he reached Bill Anderson's horse. The black mare was beautiful, 16 hands tall, with a star-shaped blaze on her forehead. She stood calmly as the stranger approached, used to the presence of men. But the stranger's eyes were not on the horse. They were on the saddle. 47 scalps. He had heard the stories, had heard the numbers, but seeing them up close, counting them, watching them sway gently in the night breeze like some horrific wind chime. He had to fight to keep his dinner down. Each scalp was braided into the leather. Some were dark, some were light, some were gray with age, some were so small they could only have come from... The stranger looked away. He could not think about that, could not process what he was seeing, could not let himself feel anything except the cold, analytical detachment of a spy doing his job. Information. He was here for information. The scalps were information. The horse was information. Everything was information. He checked the horse's hooves, tightened the saddle straps, moved on to the next animal, but his hands were shaking, and he did not notice that the red-haired guerrilla had been watching his reaction the entire time. The 6th hour brought Frank James, Bill Anderson's second-in-command, and Jesse's older brother, was a different kind of terror than Bill himself. Where Bill was cold and empty, Frank was calculating, intelligent. The kind of man who thought 3 steps ahead and planned for contingencies most people never imagined. He approached the stranger at the horse line. "You have good hands with the animals." It was not quite a compliment, not quite a question, something in between. The stranger nodded. "Grew up on a farm. Horses were all we had after the cattle died." Frank James studied him. "Lexington, right? I know some people there, the Hendersons, the Carvers, the family that runs the mill on the north side of town." The stranger's blood turned to ice. This was a test. It had to be a test. Frank James was naming families. Some real, probably some invented, to see if the stranger actually knew Lexington, if he agreed to knowing a family that did not exist. The Hendersons. The stranger pretended to think, "I knew them, or knew of them. My farm was south of town. Did not get into Lexington much, just for supplies." Frank James's expression did not change. The Hendersons moved to Kansas in '62. The stranger shrugged. Like I said, did not know them well. Frank studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Get some sleep. We ride hard tomorrow." He walked away. The stranger sagged against the nearest horse, his knees suddenly weak. He had passed another test. But how many more would there be? How many more traps were waiting in the casual conversations and pointed questions of these men? And why did he feel like Frank James had not believed a single word he said? The 7th hour brought restless sleep. The stranger found a spot at the edge of the camp, wrapped himself in his bedroll and pretended to sleep. But his eyes would not stay closed. His mind would not stop racing. Around him, the camp gradually quieted. Campfires burned low. Men snored or muttered in their dreams. Somewhere in the darkness, a guard walked a slow circuit, his boots crunching softly on the forest floor. The stranger reviewed what he had learned. The train, the timing, the escape routes, the weapons cache, the target in Sturgeon. It was more than enough. More intelligence than any other spy had gathered in months. He just had to get it out. But when? The guerrillas rode at dawn. He would be expected to ride with them, expected to participate in whatever violence they had planned, expected to kill Union soldiers alongside these men. Could he do that? Could he kill his own people to maintain his cover? He had been prepared for this question, had rehearsed his answer 100 times in the safety of Union headquarters. Yes, if necessary. The information he gathered could save 1,000 lives. A few deaths now would be worth it in the end. But lying in the darkness of a guerrilla camp, surrounded by men who had scalped their enemies and braided the hair into their saddles, the calculation felt different, colder, harder to justify. The stranger closed his eyes. Dawn was still hours away. He would find a way. He had to. The 8th hour brought nightmares. The stranger dreamed of his wife. She was standing in a field of wheat, golden in the summer sun. She was smiling at him, reaching for him. But when he tried to walk toward her, the wheat turned to blood, and her smile turned to a scream, and behind her, riding out of the crimson waves, came a man on a black horse with 47 scalps on his saddle. The stranger woke with a gasp. Sweat soaked his bedroll. His heart pounded against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Just a dream. Just a dream. But when he looked up, he saw Jesse James sitting by a nearby campfire, watching him. Those ancient eyes missed nothing. Not the gasp, not the sweat, not the expression of terror that the stranger had not been able to hide. The boy did not speak, just watched, and somewhere in that calculating young mind, another piece clicked into place. The 9th hour brought dawn. Grey light filtered through the trees as the camp stirred to life. Men rolled out of bedrolls, cursing the cold and the early hour. Campfires flared as coffee was heated. Horses whinnied for food and water. The stranger moved through the morning routine on automatic, his mind still racing. He had to make a decision. Ride with the guerrillas and risk having to kill his own people, or attempt to slip away now in the chaos of the breaking camp. The second option was suicide. Guards were posted at every exit from the clearing. The forest beyond was unfamiliar territory that the guerrillas knew like their own hands. He would be caught within an hour. And then, the stranger touched his left boot. No, he would ride with them, participate if he had to, find an opportunity to escape during the chaos of whatever attack they had planned. It was the only way. The 10th hour brought Bill Anderson's orders. The guerrilla leader stood in the center of the camp, his black horse saddled and ready behind him. The morning sun caught his face, casting shadows that made him look older than his 24 years. Older than any man should look. Listen up. His voice was soft, but it carried. Every man in the camp stopped what they were doing and turned to face him. Union train coming through Centralia tomorrow morning. We're going to take it. A murmur ran through the camp. The stranger felt his blood chill. Centralia. He had heard that name at the campfire last night. Something big was being planned there, something brutal. How many soldiers on the train? Someone asked. Bill Anderson smiled. Does not matter. They are all going to die. The stranger forced himself to nod along with the others, forced himself to look eager for blood, forced himself to be the vengeful widower from Lexington who wanted nothing more than Union scalps. But inside, his mind was screaming. He had to get this information out, had to warn the Union, had to save whatever soldiers were riding that train. But how? We ride in 1 hour. Bill Anderson turned back toward his horse, and then he stopped. He turned and looked directly at the stranger. New blood. Come here. The stranger's heart stopped. Every eye in the camp turned toward him. He walked forward on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The distance between him and Bill Anderson seemed to stretch into miles. The morning air felt thick as water. He stopped in front of the guerrilla leader. Bill Anderson studied him. Those cold blue eyes. Eyes that had watched his sister die. Eyes that had seen things no human should see. Eyes that had stopped feeling anything a long time ago. Fixed on the stranger's face. You claim you want revenge on the Union. It was not a question. The stranger nodded. More than anything. Bill Anderson tilted his head slightly. Then prove it. Tonight, when we hit that train. I want to see what you are made of. The stranger forced himself to meet that dead gaze. You will. Bill Anderson studied him for another moment, then nodded. Good, because if you disappoint me. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The stranger walked back to his spot on legs that would not stop shaking. He had less than 24 hours now. Less than 24 hours before he would have to kill Union soldiers, or be killed himself. There had to be another way. There had to be. But what he did not know, what he could not possibly know, was that Bill Anderson had already decided his fate. What he did not know was that the guerrilla leader had seen something in his eyes. Something wrong. something that did not quite fit. What he did not know was that the test was not tomorrow, the test was tonight, and he had already failed it. He just did not know it yet. The 11th hour brought the question. The camp was nearly broken down. Horses were saddled. Weapons were loaded. Men were mounting up for the ride toward Centralia. The stranger was adjusting his saddle straps when the voice came from behind him. One more thing. He turned. Bill Anderson stood 3 feet away. His hand rested casually on the grip of his Colt Navy. Behind him, 40 guerrillas had stopped what they were doing. They were arranged in a loose circle around the stranger, blocking every exit. Jesse James stood at Bill's right hand, Frank James at his left. The camp had gone completely silent. The stranger felt his mouth go dry. What is the river password? Bill Anderson's voice was soft, almost gentle. The stranger's mind went blank. The river password. He had never heard those words before, had never been briefed on any password. His Union handlers had warned him that the guerrillas had codes, but they had never known what they were, because no spy had ever survived long enough to report them back. The stranger opened his mouth. Nothing came out. 1 second of silence, 2 seconds, 3. Around the circle, hands drifted toward pistols. Jesse James's ancient eyes glittered with something like anticipation. Frank James's expression did not change, but his fingers flexed on the grip of his revolver. Bill Anderson's lips curved into that smile that was not a smile. I thought so. The stranger's world collapsed. He knew in that moment that he was dead. There was no escape, no talking his way out, no clever lie that would save him. He was surrounded by 40 men who had killed hundreds, men who had scalped their enemies and braided the hair into their saddles, men who followed a leader whose sister had been murdered by the Union and who had sworn to make every bluebelly pay for it. And he was a Union spy. The stranger's hand moved toward his pistol. I would not. Bill Anderson's Colt was out and leveled before the stranger could blink. You have been in my camp for 11 hours. You have eaten my food. You have listened to my men's plans. You have touched my horses. His voice was still soft, still gentle, still the voice of a man who had forgotten what human emotions felt like. Did you really think I did not know what you were? The stranger's hand froze on his pistol grip. You knew. Bill Anderson laughed. It was a hollow sound, empty, like wind through a dead tree. I knew the moment you rode into camp, the way you held yourself, the way you looked at my men, the way you looked at the scalps. He stepped closer. A real Confederate would have smiled at those scalps, would have wanted to add his own. But you, he shook his head. You almost vomited. I saw it. My men saw it. We have been watching you all night. The stranger felt something break inside him. 11 hours. He had thought he was gathering intelligence, thought he was fooling these men, thought he was in control, but they had been playing with him, letting him run, seeing what he would do, who he would talk to, what he would reveal. Then why? His voice cracked. Why let me stay? Bill Anderson's dead eyes finally showed a flicker of something. Not pleasure, not anger, something colder. Curiosity. Because I wanted to know who sent you, what you were looking for, how much you learned. He holstered his pistol, slowly, deliberately, showing that he did not need a weapon to control this moment. And now I know. He turned to walk away. Jesse, Frank, make it last. I want the Union to find him in pieces. No. The stranger lunged for his pistol, but Jesse James was faster. The 17-year-old's hand moved in a blur. The Colt cleared leather, the hammer cocked, and the barrel pressed against the stranger's forehead before his fingers could close on his own weapon. First time I have caught someone myself. Jesse's voice was soft, almost disappointed. Thought it would be harder. The stranger looked into those ancient young eyes and saw his death looking back at him. He had one last moment to think of his wife, to think of the children they had never had, to think of the life he would never live. And then Jesse James pulled the trigger. But wait, before we see what happened next, before we learn what Bill Anderson did with the spy's body, before we understand how this moment would echo through history, we need to go back further, back to understand why Bill Anderson became what he became. back to a 14-year-old girl named Josephine, back to a building in Kansas City, back to the 6 minutes that created Bloody Bill. Because without that story, this story means nothing. And without understanding the monster, you cannot understand the man. Kansas City, Missouri, August 1863. 1 year before the spy would die in a forest clearing, with Jesse James's pistol pressed to his forehead. 1 year before Bill Anderson would become the most feared man in Missouri. 1 year before everything. The building was a 3-story brick structure on Grand Avenue. It had been a warehouse once, before the Union Army commandeered it. Now it was a prison, but not for soldiers, for women. The Union had a problem with the guerrilla bands that roamed Missouri. They could not catch the men. The bushwhackers were too fast, too mobile, too willing to disappear into the forests and hollows they knew like their own hands. So the Union decided to catch the women instead. Mothers, sisters, wives, daughters. The logic was simple. The guerrillas relied on sympathizers for food, shelter, and information. Cut off those sympathizers, and the guerrillas would starve. And the best way to cut off the sympathizers was to imprison their families. By the summer of 1863, over 100 women and girls were being held in Union prisons throughout Missouri. Most of them had committed no crime except being related to Confederate soldiers, and 5 of them were related to William Anderson, his mother, his 3 sisters, and Josephine. Josephine Anderson was 14 years old. She had dark hair like her brother, dark eyes that had not yet learned to be afraid. She was the youngest of the Anderson sisters, and she was being held on the 3rd floor of the building on Grand Avenue. The Union guards said the building was secure. The Union commanders said the prisoners were safe. The Union Army said nothing was wrong. They were all lying. Because the building on Grand Avenue was not secure at all. It was rotting from the inside out. The guards had noticed the cracks weeks before. They ran through the walls of the 1st floor like dark veins, spreading wider each day. The floor sagged in places. The support beams groaned when the wind blew, but the war was expensive. Repairs were not a priority. The women inside were Confederate sympathizers, traitors as far as the Union was concerned. Why spend money fixing their prison? So the cracks spread, and the beams groaned. And the women on the 3rd floor prayed. And on August 13, 1863, at approximately 2 in the afternoon, the building collapsed. Josephine Anderson was brushing her sister Mary's hair when the first beam gave way. The sound was like nothing she had ever heard. A scream of wood and metal that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The floor lurched beneath her feet, and then, falling. The 3rd floor dropped into the 2nd floor. The 2nd floor dropped into the 1st. Brick and wood and plaster and bodies all coming down together in a cascade of destruction that lasted less than 10 seconds. Josephine was trapped. Her legs were pinned under a beam. Her right arm was caught beneath a pile of bricks. She could not move, could not escape, could only lie there in the darkness and the dust and scream. The screaming lasted 6 minutes. Some of the women died instantly. They were the lucky ones. Others, like Josephine, were trapped in the rubble, conscious, aware, feeling every second of the weight pressing down on them. Help came eventually, but not fast enough. Not for Josephine Anderson. By the time rescuers pulled her broken body from the debris, she had been dead for nearly an hour. The 14-year-old girl who had never done anything wrong, who had been imprisoned only because her brother was a Confederate guerrilla, had died alone in the dark, crushed by the building that was supposed to keep her safe. 4 other women died that day. 5 lives ended because the Union could not be bothered to fix a rotting building. And somewhere in the Missouri wilderness, a 23-year-old man named William Anderson received the news. His baby sister was dead, killed by the Union. And something inside him, something that had been human, something that had been capable of mercy and love and compassion, that something died with her. The Union called it an accident, a structural failure, an unfortunate tragedy. No one's fault, really. Just bad luck, bad timing. Nothing to be done about it now. They held no one accountable. They offered no apologies. They buried the women in unmarked graves and moved on. But Bill Anderson did not move on. Bill Anderson sat in a forest clearing with his sister's bloody dress in his hands. The dress she had been wearing when the building collapsed, the dress that was still stained with her blood. And he made a promise. Every Union soldier in Missouri would pay for Josephine's death, every single one. He would not stop until the rivers ran red, until the fields were fertilized with Union bones, until the screams of dying bluebellies echoed across every county in the state. They had killed his sister. Now he would kill their sons. This was the moment that Bloody Bill was born. This was why a spy would die in a forest clearing 1 year later, with 47 scalps already braided into the saddle of the man who ordered his death. This was the engine that drove everything. Every massacre, every execution, every atrocity that would follow. A 14-year-old girl named Josephine, a rotting building, 6 minutes of screaming, and a promise made in blood. Now you understand. Now you understand why Bill Anderson asked the spy about the river password, why he let the man stay for 11 hours, why he watched and waited and tested, because every Union spy was a reminder. Every bluebelly in his camp, every potential traitor, every possible infiltrator, was another chance to answer Josephine's screams. The password itself did not matter. Bill Anderson had known the spy was false from the moment he rode into camp. The password was just the excuse, the formality, the polite way of saying, "I'm going to kill you now, and here is why." But the spy did not know that. The spy thought he had a chance. The spy thought, right up until Jesse James pressed that Colt against his forehead, that maybe, just maybe, he could talk his way out. He could not. No one could talk their way out of Bill Anderson's grief. The stranger's body hit the ground. The bullet had entered his forehead just above the left eye. The exit wound removed most of the back of his skull. Blood and brain matter painted the forest floor in a spreading pool of red and gray. Jesse James looked down at his first solo kill. The 17-year-old's face showed nothing, no satisfaction, no horror, no guilt. Just the empty calm of a young man who had already seen too much death to feel anything at all. Clean. Bill Anderson nodded approvingly. One shot, center of the forehead. That is how it is done. Jesse holstered his pistol. What do we do with him? Bill Anderson walked over to the body. He knelt beside it, studying the dead face with something like curiosity. The spy had been brave, in his way. He had ridden into a camp of killers and maintained his cover for 11 hours. He had not broken under questioning. He had not tried to run, even when he must have known he was being watched, in another time, in another war. Bill Anderson might have respected that. But this was not another time, and respect did not stop Bill Anderson from doing what needed to be done. Check his boots. Frank James stepped forward. He knelt beside the body and began unlacing the left boot, the boot the spy had been touching all night. The hollow heel came apart easily. Inside was a folded map. Every Union patrol route within 50 miles, every safe house marked with red ink, every escape route the spy had been planning to use. Frank unfolded the map and studied it. He knew everything. Bill Anderson took the map. He knew enough to get us all killed, to get our families killed, to end everything we have built here. He looked down at the body. Strip him, take his weapons, his horse, everything useful. He paused, and then sent him back. Jesse frowned. Back where? To the Union, in pieces. I want them to see what happens to their spies. I want them to know that every man they send into my camp will go home in a feed sack. He smiled that smile that was not a smile. Let them count the pieces and wonder which one used to be the face. What happened next took 3 hours. This is the part of the story that the history books do not tell you, the part that witnesses refuse to describe in detail, the part that survivors would only mention in whispers decades later, when they were old and drunk and convinced they were about to die anyway. The spy's body was dismembered, not quickly, not cleanly, not with any mercy. Bill Anderson supervised every cut. He did not participate himself. That was not his way. Bloody Bill gave orders, others carried them out. And on that morning in a Missouri forest, his orders were very specific. Start with the hands. He used them to write his lies. Then the feet. He used them to walk into my camp. Then the tongue. He used it to deceive my men. The guerrillas worked in shifts. Some could not stomach it. They turned away, vomiting into the bushes. Others found something like pleasure in the work, something that satisfied the same dark urge that made men collect scalps. Jesse James watched the entire thing. He did not participate, did not look away, just watched, those ancient eyes taking in every detail, filing it away in some corner of his mind that would never forget. Years later, as an outlaw, Jesse James would become known for his cold efficiency, his ability to kill without hesitation or remorse, his reputation for violence that seemed to come from nowhere. But it did not come from nowhere. It came from mornings like this one. It came from watching Bloody Bill Anderson teach him what revenge really looked like. By noon, there was nothing left of the spy that resembled a human being. The pieces were loaded into a canvas sack, the kind of sack farmers used to carry feed for their livestock. The irony was not lost on anyone. Bill Anderson selected 2 of his newest recruits, men who had not yet proven themselves, men who might think twice about betraying him after seeing what he did to traitors. Ride to the Union outpost at Fayette. Leave this on the road where their patrols will find it. He handed one of them a piece of paper. And leave this note. The note was short. Just 3 lines written in Bill Anderson's careful handwriting. He lasted 11 hours. The next one will last less. Stop sending them. The recruits rode out with the sack of remains bouncing on the back of one horse. Bill Anderson watched them go. Then he turned to his men. Break camp. We have a train to catch. The Centralia massacre would happen 2 weeks later. 23 unarmed Union soldiers pulled from a train, forced to strip, executed one by one while Bill Anderson counted the bodies. It was the single most brutal act of the border war. It made Bloody Bill Anderson a legend. But on that morning in the forest, on the morning when a spy learned the hard way that there are no second chances with ghosts, none of that had happened yet. What had happened was a lesson for Jesse James about the cost of mercy, a lesson for Frank James about the price of loyalty, a lesson for every guerrilla in that camp about what happened to men who tried to deceive Bloody Bill, and a lesson for the Union Army about the futility of sending spies into the den of a man who had nothing left to lose. The Union found what remained of their spy 3 days later. A patrol discovered the feed sack on the road outside Fayette, just as Bill Anderson had intended. The soldiers who opened it, well, some of them never recovered. One reportedly resigned his commission that same day and walked back to Illinois on foot. The note was delivered to Colonel James H. Ford at Union headquarters in Jefferson City. Ford was a practical man, a military man. He understood that war was brutal and that brutality begat brutality in an endless cycle of horror. But even he was shaken by what he saw in that feed sack. This was not warfare. This was something else, something that had no name in the military manuals, something that existed in the space between human and monster, in the darkness where grief transformed into madness and revenge became religion. Ford ordered the remains buried quietly. No announcement, no public record. Just a hole in the ground and a prayer that no one would remember. But he also ordered something else. No more spies. From that day forward, the Union would not send infiltrators into Bill Anderson's camps, would not try to deceive him, would not attempt to gather intelligence through subterfuge. They would simply hunt him down and kill him. It took 2 more months. It took 2 more massacres. It took the deaths of over 200 Union soldiers and countless civilians. But on October 26, 1864, Bloody Bill Anderson finally met his end, shot in the back of the head while leading a charge against Union cavalry, dead at 24 years old. He never got his revenge for Josephine, because revenge, it turns out, is a hunger that can never be satisfied. You can feed it and feed it and feed it, with scalps and screams and the bodies of men who had nothing to do with your sister's death, and it still wants more, always more, until there is nothing left of you but the hunger itself. The spy whose name was never recorded. We do not know what his real identity was. The Union kept no official records of failed intelligence operations. Too embarrassing, too demoralizing to acknowledge that their men had died in vain. We do not know if he had a wife, children, a family waiting for him to come home. All we know is that he rode into Bloody Bill Anderson's camp on a summer morning in 1864. that he spent 11 hours thinking he was fooling everyone, that he learned in the last seconds of his life that he had fooled no one, and that his body was returned to the Union in pieces small enough to fit in a feed sack. But here is what the history books also do not tell you. The spy, whoever he was brave. He walked into the camp of the most feared guerrilla in Missouri, knowing that death was the likely outcome. He maintained his cover for 11 hours while being watched by men who had killed hundreds. He did not beg, did not plead, did not try to bargain for his life. When Jesse James pressed that Colt against his forehead, he did not close his eyes. He looked the 17-year-old killer straight in the face, and his last thought, according to what Jesse James would tell others years later, was not of fear. His lips moved just before the trigger was pulled. Jesse was never sure what he said, but he thought the spy might have been saying his wife's name, a final word of love in the face of death, a reminder that even spies are human, even enemies have families, even the men we hate were loved by someone. Bill Anderson never understood that. He never could understand that, because understanding that would have meant questioning everything he had done since Josephine died. Would have meant admitting that the Union soldiers he killed were just men, just boys really, most of them, who had families waiting for them too. Would have meant admitting that his revenge had created 1,000 more Josephines, 1,000 more families destroyed, 1,000 more hearts broken. Bill Anderson could not afford that understanding, so he buried it under scalps and screams and the bodies of men who never got to say their wives' names. And he kept killing until someone finally killed him. Jesse James survived the border war. He would go on to become the most famous outlaw in American history. Banks, trains, stagecoaches. He robbed them all with the same cold efficiency he had learned in Bloody Bill's camp. But he never forgot the spy. Decades later, as an old outlaw living under an assumed name, Jesse would sometimes tell the story at campfires or in saloons. He lasted 11 hours. Jesse would shake his head, longer than most, shorter than some. Bill knew from the start, he always knew, that was his gift. Seeing through people, seeing who they really were underneath. Someone would always ask, "What was the river password?" Jesse would smile. "Does not matter now. We are all dead or dying anyway. Bill is dead. The spy is dead. Missouri forgot everything we did within a generation." He would stare into the fire, but I never forgot his face. The spy. Right before I pulled the trigger, he looked at me like he was sorry for me. Not afraid, not angry, just sorry. Jesse would fall silent for a long time after that. Then he would drain his whiskey and ask for another. Some memories do not fade. Some faces never leave you. The spy, whose name was never recorded, became one of those faces for Jesse James. A reminder that every bullet has a story. Every death creates a ripple. And every act of violence, no matter how justified, no matter how righteous, leaves a mark on both the killer and the killed. You have just spent the last several minutes living through one of the most brutal chapters of the American Civil War. Not the battles you read about in textbooks, not the great generals and their grand strategies, but the real war, the intimate war. The war fought in forest clearings and farm fields by men who had stopped being men somewhere along the way. This story, the story of a spy who lasted 11 hours in Bloody Bill Anderson's camp, is not well known. It is not taught in schools. It is not commemorated with monuments. But it happened, men like the spy. Union intelligence operatives who rode into enemy territory, knowing they would probably never return, were the forgotten heroes of the Civil War. They did not wear uniforms. They did not march in formation. They did not get medals or recognition or statues. They simply rode into the darkness, and most of them never came back. The spy whose body was returned to Fayette in a feed sack was one of thousands. His name is lost to history. His sacrifice is remembered by no one. But he was there, and he was brave. And for 11 hours he thought he was saving lives. That has to count for something. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the Civil War, about violence, about the cost of revenge, then please consider showing your support. When you click super thanks below this video, you are not just supporting a channel, You are saying that these forgotten stories matter. You are saying that history deserves to be remembered, even the parts that make us uncomfortable, especially those parts. Every contribution helps us research and tell more stories like this one. Stories that the textbooks left out. Stories that challenge what we think we know about our past. The spy, whose name was never recorded, cannot thank you, but we can, and we do. Bill Anderson died on October 26, 1864, shot twice in the back of the head during a charge against Union cavalry near Albany, Missouri. He was 24 years old. The Union soldiers who found his body did not know what to do with it at first. This was the most feared guerrilla in Missouri, the man with 47 scalps on his saddle, the monster of Centralia, the killer of hundreds. And now he was just dead. Just a body on the ground, just blood and bone and meat like any other corpse. They took his weapons, his horse, his saddle, though no one wanted to touch the scalps, so they burned the entire thing. Then they loaded his body onto a wagon and took it to Richmond, Missouri. For 3 days, Bill Anderson's corpse was displayed in the town square. People came from miles around to see it. Men came to spit on it. Women came to stab it with knitting needles and kitchen knives. Children came to throw rocks at the face of the monster. Their parents had told them about in whispered bedtime stories. By the time they finally buried him, there was not much left to bury. But here is the part that matters. Here is the part that no one talks about. On the 3rd day of the display, a woman in black rode into Richmond. She was old, weathered, dressed in mourning clothes that looked like they had not been changed in years. She walked through the crowd without speaking. She approached the body of bloody Bill Anderson, and she looked at his face. What was left of it? For a very long time. Then she reached into her pocket, and she placed something on his chest. A photograph. Her tintype image of a young girl with dark hair and dark eyes. Josephine Anderson, Bill's youngest sister. The woman was Mrs. Anderson, Bill's mother. The woman who had watched the Union drag her daughters away, who had been imprisoned herself, who had lost everything except her grief. She stood there for a moment. Then she turned and walked away. No one stopped her. No one asked who she was. The photograph stayed on Bill Anderson's chest until they lowered his body into the ground. Mother and son, monster and maker, both destroyed by the same war, both buried with the memory of a 14-year-old girl. The river password. You want to know what it was, do you not? What those 2 words were that could have saved the spy's life? What he should have said when Bill Anderson asked the question. It does not matter anymore, the war is over. The men who knew the password are all dead. The rivers they were protecting have new names now. But if you really want to know, the password was Blue Thunder. That was it. 2 words. Blue Thunder. The call sign for a river crossing near Rocheport, where the guerrillas would ford the Missouri River on moonless nights. A phrase that meant, I am one of you. I know where the safe places are. I have bled with you. The spy never learned it. His Union handlers never discovered it. And so he died with those 2 words unspoken. Blue Thunder. 11 hours of perfect deception. Undone by 2 words he should have known. So, what do you think? Was the spy a hero? A man who gave his life trying to stop a monster? Or was he a fool? A man who walked into his own death and achieved nothing? Was Bill Anderson a monster? A man who tortured and killed without mercy? Or was he a product of monstrous times? A man who watched his sister die and lost his mind to grief? There are no easy answers. That is what war does. That is what revenge does. It takes the questions that should be simple. Good and evil, right and wrong, hero and villain. And it twists them until they mean nothing at all. The spy was brave, and he failed. Bill Anderson was insane, and he was justified. Both of these things are true. Neither of them helps, but at least now you know the story. At least now you can decide for yourself. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what you would have done in the spy's place. Tell us whether you think Bill Anderson deserved his end. Tell us what you learned from a story about 2 words that were never spoken. The river password, Blue Thunder, 11 hours, and a feed sack full of pieces. That is the border war. That is the truth they do not teach in schools. And that That is what it cost to infiltrate Bloody Bill Anderson's camp.